Hello everybody, here we are today talking about the Buffalo Sabres firing head coach Don Granato and getting into that. So before we start with it, please make sure to subscribe if you're new to me or hockey, whatever the case may be. That being said, let's get on into it. So yes, I'm going to be honest, these are just my quick thoughts as I was doing notes for another video today during lunch, got out of my car and saw the news on my phone. So today the Sabres ended up making a head coaching change by firing Don Granato after 3.5 seasons. Going into this year, the Sabres were probably excited to have Granato there, and the fans, I imagine, as well. They had 91 points last year. Looked like maybe this year was going to be either they take a step as a team and maybe in the playoff drought, which is now 13 seasons. And of course, as you are all well aware, they didn't end up doing that. They finished with 84 points, which is actually not really bad, especially by their standards. You look at mid-2010s Buffalo Sabres teams and you realize that it would be a pretty good year. But this, I guess, is a good indication about where the Sabres are, where they feel like if a coach is not getting into the playoffs, they need to make a change. So they move on from him solely because of this. If they make the playoffs, there's no way he gets fired, even if they finish with lower points. But yeah, going from 91 points to 84 points, while not being a terrible year, you're not a league bottom feeder by any means. You're definitely not going to be sniffing a playoff spot with that points total. And of course, he gets the brunt of all that as he gets the boot. And I look at the 3 seasons that he was in charge, full seasons, 75 points, 91 points, and 84 points. Again, not anything that makes you say, oh my gosh, this team is absolutely loaded, but enough to say this is respectable, especially for a team that was a lottery side for a while. And this club is one of the youngest, if not the youngest by average age in the league at this point. So this year you knew there was going to be ups and downs. Now I'm going to be honest with you here. We talked about in a video recently for the Sabres, a big thing holding them back was the fact that they allowed so many first period goals at time of recording that, which was last week. They had allowed the most in the league, and they allowed the most multi-goal first period goals, I believe, and they just couldn't come back. They had a record of like 7-26-2 in all those games. You get buried early, you're not going to be able to climb out of that, and that was a big reason as to why they ended up where they were. And I got to be honest, this was a year that wasn't something that was truly awful for Buffalo fans. They were never out of the playoff contention, I guess. You knew that they were, probably well out of striking distance, but they would kind of just keep being there, and you would look over every once in a while and be like, how are you still kind of around? And they were the 11th team eliminated from the playoffs, which, again, back a few years ago, they probably would have been the first or second team to be eliminated from playoff contention. They were able to keep it there, not as late as they did last season, but still a side that is not just going to be a truly terrible year. And I look at this team too, and one of the things that stuck out to me was from Sabres Source, which again, this is something that you can look up, but I saw it off there, so I'm going to give them credit. This is the 8th head coach for the Buffalo Sabres in the past 13 seasons. 13 seasons, of course, coinciding with the playoff drop. I look at that and I see inconsistency. And to be fair, some of these coaches had really bad years, but the rosters weren't perfect. And looking at that many coaches and that many seasons, it almost reminds me of soccer. Looking at a guy like Granato, according to an Athletic article that I read, he was the 6th longest tenured head coach in the league this season, even though he hadn't even been there 4 years. And especially with a team like Buffalo, I know that in soccer, they will fire their head coaches pretty quickly. This kind of reminds me of that, maybe to not that extent with Granato, but you don't have a coach more than every other year on this period without having some bit of dysfunctionality, and that's exactly what Buffalo's got going on here. So you need to make sure that the next hire is the right hire, because this city, this fan base, whether you want to believe it or not, is kind of disinterested. I know that the attendance has been dropping a little bit. I think that everybody's still fans. I don't think there's people that are just in droves saying I'm not a fan of this team anymore. But it just gets to be more and more frustrating where you get through a rebuild and then you realize the rebuild's not done. This team is not competent. This team is not going to be able to make the playoffs. They're not going to be able to get things done quickly. We got to tear it down and build it up again. You're already looking at a 13-year playoff drought. If you get the wrong hire this time, then you could be looking at where this drought maybe hits 20. And in this era where half of the teams get into the playoffs, that's just not really acceptable. And this is where I really hold the opinion that the Sabres need to make sure that they have that guy, because if Granato was able to have relatively respectable results for the franchise in this period and they end up moving on from him, you cannot have a guy be worse and have all these fans were saying fire him, fire him, fire him during these games, and then bringing another guy back, well, he's going to be better, and then him be worse. because young players especially need stability. I'm not saying that they can't do well in an unstable situation, but you kind of want to know who's going to be there. You kind of want a guy that's going to be able to see you through your development and see you take the next step in your season and in your career, because if these younger guys are constantly have to deal with new head coaches, look at a guy like Connor McDavid. He had a lot of head coaches, I think, early on in his time with Edmonton. For the most part, you're not going to be Connor McDavid where you're just good because you're good. You're going to have guys that are going to be your fourth line guys, your third line guys. Some of these guys are going to be your fringe AHL guys that are going to get called up. If you actually want to be a competent playoff team, you need to have a coach and a coaching staff that can make sure these players are able to have an impact at the NHL level, whether that is as a forward that's getting something like 13 minutes a night or as a third pairing defenseman. Whatever the case is, you've got to be able to have the right hire, because if this gets to 20 years, I think attendance is just going to be atrocious. And you also have to understand, sometimes things take patience. I talked before, and I know I'm going to sound like a broken record here. The Sabres are in a spot with the division that is very hard to see a playoff picture opening up for them, because Boston's been able to perform despite the fact that they lose veteran players. Florida, despite the fact that they're probably going to regress a little bit with some of the money issues they're going to face this summer, is still likely going to be in and around the playoff conversation. Been a really good team over the past few years. Toronto has locked up a lot of their key guys, you know, the baby Leafs from back in the day in the mid to late 2010s. Shouldn't be a back in the day statement, but boy, does time fly. Those guys, most of them, and pretty soon all of them, will have extensions signed where they're with them long term. That's 3 spots right there. You're thinking probably you're at least going to be in contention for top 3 in the division. Then you have the Tampa Bay Lightning. Do I think that Tampa Bay could fall off, especially as a guy like Stamkos could leave? I think it'd be interesting because, again, they don't have a ton of high-end picks. They have some money tied up in these players. If Stamkos left, it would give them a little bit more money, so there's that. But then a team like Detroit, side that is still in playoff conversation right now, if they have a little bit of luck tonight, they're going to be able to make the playoffs. So you got to compete with a Detroit side that, if they fix some of the things that are holding them back, especially the fact that they allow a ton of goals, they're probably going to be a wild card contending team at the very least. Some of these guys like Lucas Raymond on the team, by the way, fantastic game last night. I watched it even though it looked like the game was over. That third period goal, wow. And then the overtime goal, insane. That's going to be a problem. Ottawa Senators, not saying that they are studs by any means, but they have been able to finish out the year relatively well, and I think they're still going to try to be committed to winning next season, so there's no guarantee. Plus, you have the Montreal Canadiens, and I'm not going to really dive on into that, and I mean this in the most respectable way. Whenever I talk about the Habs on this channel, it ultimately leads to the fans that are so passionate about this team. It's practically like a religion, that all these guys, of course, are going to turn out to be superstars and they're going to get back to their glory days. So let's just assume that at least they get to where they are a playoff side, because they do have young players that are playing well, and even young guys that aren't babies anymore. They are producing at an NHL level and looking to be really good. This division's really good. So it's like, are you able to get to the playoffs next year, especially when you just fired a head coach because he didn't get you to the postseason? That's where the question really remains for me. So I guess if you're looking at it from this perspective, it is playoffs or bust for the Buffalo Sabres. I don't know if it's next season. I don't know if it's the year after that. I don't want them to get aggressive and do anything ridiculous, because to me, again, patience is something to watch out for. Making sure that you do have that right hire, because you don't just fire somebody that's been able to do something relatively well for you in a span of 3 years just to bring in somebody that could be a downgrade. You do it because you probably have your eye on somebody. I'm seeing a lot of names swirling around right now that are very, very enticing. I'm not really going to say who I think is going to get hired, because a lot of times you're just like, oh, I didn't expect this candidate to get hired when all these flashy names are out there. But we have a team that is young, that is very exciting, and if they can get things going back to where they're scoring a lot of goals and they're not just digging themselves in a giant hole in the first period, they very well could take a step forward and be, at least a wild card team. I want Buffalo to make the playoffs. I think that they're a really fun team to watch. Unfortunately for this season, it is better for worse, and we're going to get to see what happens there. Side note, The Athletic talked about how none of the players on the team had hit 60 points this year when 5 did last year. I just got to say, Alex Tuck, had he played a full season, even just a couple more games, he would have made it. And then Tage Thompson definitely was at a point where he would have done it. Darlene was at 59 points in 81 games played. I don't really know, again, kind of pick or choose if that's going to happen there. But, you know, they were on the verge. I don't think that they meant it in a super serious way, like, oh, look at this, because they don't have a 60-point producer. They are just bad. There's a lot of things that they talked about in that article, but it did stick out to me where I was like, they were almost there. But anyway, what are your thoughts on Granato being fired? Who do you think they bring in? Do you think that he maybe should have been given another season? It's tough because if they underperformed again, you're probably thinking, oh, we're wasting another year. Some of these younger players and developing them. I get it. It's a very messy situation for a team that wants to be able to get back to being, I don't want to say relevant, but better, I guess. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. Please make sure to like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're new. I'm also going to be putting out another video later today, kind of talking about some of the things that I did for my notes at lunch. Anyway, everybody, please make sure to subscribe. Stay safe. Have a great night. Eagle of Hockey, all right. Goodbye, Brigadiers and Brigadettes. This is your captain signing off. Have a great night.